The sun dipped low over Dry Creek, painting the main street in the deep red of dying embers. Porch boards groaned under the weight of men watching in silence. Hats tipped forward as if a stray glance could start a duel. Through the dust curling in the wind, a woman in mourning walked with steady steps, her black dress marked by the ride from her ranch. Elizabeth Avery didn't look dangerous until you met her eyes. There was no grief there anymore, only resolve. Since her husband's death, no one in town believed she belonged anywhere near matters of law or lead. Sheriff Calloway, a weathered man with an old bullet lodged in his back, kept order as best he could. But with talk spreading that a gang of cattle thieves was riding down from the valley, doors were being barred before sunset. Dry Creek needed more than a limping sheriff. It needed a plan. No one expected that plan to come from her. In the saloon, when she spoke up about organizing a patrol, laughter rang louder than the clink of glasses. "Leave that to the men, widow," someone said. But Elizabeth didn't flinch. She straightened her shoulders, rested her hand on the stock of her Winchester, and met each gaze as if she were choosing who would still be standing the next day. That night, heavy clouds rolled down from the north, promising rain. Elizabeth knew that before the storm broke, something far worse would hit the town. Dry Creek was the kind of place that survived more out of stubbornness than prosperity. Two main streets, a scattering of wooden houses, a church, a saloon, and a general store that sold everything from nails to coffee. The railroad ran far away, and news arrived weeks late, carried by dust-covered travelers who spoke more than they should. Elizabeth Avery had buried her husband in the spring, when the fields were still green and the air smelled of alfalfa blossoms. Since then, the days had grown longer and the looks shorter. The women brought pies and kind words. The men offered silence and doubt. In the West, strength was currency, and no one believed a widow could afford it. When the first stories of stolen cattle reached town, fear spread fast. Some said the thieves came from Arizona. Others swore they recognized local faces among them. Sheriff Calloway, though respected, didn't have the speed he once did, and the town's men preferred arguing in the saloon over getting their boots dirty in the brush. Elizabeth saw it differently. If no one acted, Dry Creek would become just another ghost town, swept off the map by wind and time. She knew every hill, every canyon, every face worth saving. She had no intention of asking permission. And if you want to know how a woman they dismissed took the reins of an entire town, faced down armed men, and forever changed Dry Creek's history, stay with me until the end. From this moment on, no one dared call her poor Mrs. Avery again. If you want, I can now start chapter 1 with 1,000 words, keeping the third-person perspective and ending on a strong cliffhanger. Would you like me to continue? At first light, the wind pushed thin skeins of dust along the North Flats, smoothing the ground just enough to make what didn't belong stand out. Elizabeth Avery reined in at the Whitmore fence, where 3 strands of barbed wire had been snipped so neatly they chimed when the breeze tugged them. Beyond the break, the grass lay pressed in a corridor that funneled to the cottonwoods and the slow bend of the creek. A heifer lay 20 yards past the tree line, belly split, meat cleanly taken, hide folded like a discarded coat. Coyotes left chaos. This was tidy, professional. She swung off her mare and crouched, palm hovering over a print sunk deep in damp earth. Left boot, heel worn outward, spur cutting a shallow V. The right print dragged a fraction, as if the man favored the leg. She measured the stride by habit, as she'd measured fence posts and rows of corn all her married life. Eli's old field rule came back without asking. The land tells the truth if you learn its language. She looked up the corridor the thieves had used, and in her mind laid out where a man would set a lookout, where he'd leave a fresh horse, where he'd be sloppy if he got rushed. There was no sloppiness here. Whoever led them had studied this place as carefully as she had. By the time she rode into Dry Creek, the sun had burned white through a haze that smelled of hot iron and horse. Men clustered along the boardwalk outside the saloon and the general store, talking in that low, performative way men did when they felt watched. Sheriff Calloway stood near the hitch rail with his thumbs tucked in his belt, his face like weathered bark, green eyes half-lidded against the glare. The old bullet in his back made him angle his stance. Elizabeth could spot the adjustment the way she could spot a bent nail in a bucket. "Morning, Mrs. Avery," he said, polite, measuring. "You got yourself out early." "Not early enough," she replied, tossing her leg over and dropping to the ground. "They cut Whitmore's fence again, packed meat and left hide. Your thieves know what they're doing." A murmur moved through the gathered men. Someone spat. "Coyotes," a ranch hand offered, wanting the easier answer. Elizabeth ignored him. "Left boot worn out on the heel, right foot drags a hair, spurs mark a V, and they funnel through the cottonwoods to the bend. If we sit on the bend, we can read who rides and where they mean to go." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the men. He didn't like being told, and he didn't like her being the one to tell it. But pain makes a man practical. "I was fixing to post 2 riders on the ridge above the Gila Road," he said. "They'll see your riders a mile off," Elizabeth said. "They'll split, one party to tease your boys, the other to circle back and hit the town while you're chasing dust. These men didn't come for beef. They came to see who blinks." More murmurs, sharper this time. Tom Whitmore himself stepped forward, hat in both hands. "What do you suggest, Mrs. Avery?" "That we stop arguing in front of a saloon like children," she said evenly, "and that we plan where the thieves won't look." A smile tugged at the corner of Calloway's mouth despite himself. "All right then. Inside." The saloon's doors flapped them into a light the color of tobacco. A piano sat shut, its keys covered as if the town had put away its noise to listen. Elizabeth spread a map across the card table, though she hardly needed it. Her finger tapped the creek bend, the cottonwoods, the dark slot of Crow Canyon, the shallow ford east of the mill where the bank crumbled under hooves. She spoke fast, not to prove herself, but to outrun their doubt. "We placed 2 men above Crow Canyon, quiet, no silhouettes. Another 2 low in the creek brush to mark numbers and brands. Sheriff, you take the ridge south of the ford with 1 good shot and 1 steady rider. I'll set a decoy, 6 head, bells stuffed with rags so they don't clink, and 2 boys to ghost them along this draw. If they bite, we bleed them slow, pull them toward choke points we choose. If they don't, we still know where they sleep by where they refuse to step." "Who's your steady rider?" Calloway asked, eyes narrowed in thought now, not in pride. "Ruth Hanley," Elizabeth said without blinking. "She can sit a horse longer than any of you and shoot straighter than most. You want numbers, not swagger." A ripple of discomfort. Ruth taught the schoolchildren their letters and, on weekends, repaired tack with hands that didn't shake. Whitmore nodded, grudging respect in it. The blacksmith, Jack Boone, scratched his beard. "We'll need lantern signals," he said. "Wind will carry voices." Elizabeth drew small X's. 1 swing for hold, 2 for back, 3 for their splitting. "Good, no gunfire unless you can swear you'll land it. We want their shape, not their corpses. Not yet." A gambler in a fancy vest laughed, high and sharp. Ezra Pike, a man who dealt faro like a parson dealt verses, smiling as he took your money. "Hear that, boys? The widow's got us finger-wagging lanterns now." Elizabeth didn't look up. "Men who mock a good plan end up the lesson in someone else's," she said, and kept drawing. Ezra's grin faltered. Sheriff Calloway watched the exchange with a face that could have been carved. They moved quick after that. Boone fetched lanterns from the smithy. Ruth arrived in a plain riding skirt and a man's coat, her dark hair braided tight, chin set. 2 Whitmore hands cut 6 quiet cows from the herd. The group split with a purpose Dry Creek rarely mustered, not bravado, but work. Elizabeth saddled her mare and, for a fleeting second, laid a palm on the saddle horn as if it were a headstone. Eli had carved that horn smooth in the first winter, whittling by firelight to keep his hands busy and his fear useful. "Keep me honest," she murmured, and swung up. They rode hard and quiet, threading the outcroppings, letting the land swallow their sound. The north flats opened to cottonwoods that held the morning like a whispered secret. Elizabeth sent Whitmore's boys with the decoy cattle along the draw she'd traced, ears open for the soft cluck she'd taught them to signal trouble. She placed Ruth on the south ridge in a hollow of rock where wind skipped and bullets drifted. She took the lower position herself, in the creek brush, where she could read hooves in mud and faces through leaves. An hour passed like a held breath. A hawk wheeled. Somewhere far off a hammer rang, Boone at his forge perhaps, or just the memory of a hammer in a town that wanted to believe in the sound of work. Then from the west, a thread of dust crept along the ground, the particular kind that comes from 4, maybe 5 horses keeping pace. Elizabeth lifted her field glasses, hats low, bandanas up, coats dark. One rider slouched to favor a leg. Spurs flashed, cutting that shallow V in the prints he'd soon leave. Her mouth tightened. Left heel worn out. Right foot drag. The same man who'd signed the dirt at Whitmore's fence. She signaled once. Hold. The lantern winked from the ridge in reply. The riders slowed at the cottonwoods, letting their horses drink, acting like men who owned the place. The slouched one turned his head to spit. Sun flared on a silver concho on his bridle, etched with a simple star and a nick like a crescent moon. Elizabeth filed it away. Details made nooses or set men free. Then something was wrong. Behind the 5 riders, farther west than she expected, a second smear of dust lifted, thin but steady. She tipped the glasses. 2 more, lagging. Scouts, or the tail of a larger group? Her jaw worked. If the gang was splitting, one jaw to test, the other to circle, their guess at Dry Creek's weakness wasn't courage, but arithmetic. Sheriff on a ridge, decoy in a draw, schoolteacher in the rocks. The town itself, women, children, a drunk faro dealer, thin as eggshell. Elizabeth's pulse sharpened into a clear line of thought. She signaled twice, back. Ruth's lantern answered, 2 slow arcs. Calloway's, a single impatient swing, hold. He'd seen the closer 5 and wanted to keep them framed. He hadn't clocked the second dust yet. She lifted to signal 3, split. When a small sound cut the brush behind her. Not a bird. Leather creaking, quiet as prayer. Elizabeth did not turn. She let her gaze drift as if following a dragonfly, then slid 2 fingers along her rifle stock until they found the notch Eli had cut for her grip. A voice came low and near, a voice she knew from Sunday mornings and town meetings, a voice that said her name like a neighbor and a warning at once. "Slow, Mrs. Avery," the voice said. "Set that rifle down." Her stomach cooled. She had the particular sinking clarity of a woman who realizes the hole in the fence wasn't outside the yard. She eased her breath. The rifle stayed across her knees. "You favor your right foot," she said softly, eyes still forward. "Your spur marks a V. Left heel worn flat as a table. I should have noticed sooner. Guess grief makes more noise than I thought." The muzzle pressed lightly into the back of her coat. Cloth dimpled. "You're good," the man said. "Too good to keep around, truth be told." "Town doesn't need another corpse," Elizabeth replied. "It needs names." "Names don't matter," the voice said, and the gun dug harder. "Money does. Fear does. You'll need both if you're going to run a place like this." Across the creek, the 5 riders began to move again, turning their horses toward the ford as if the day were theirs already. On the ridge, Sheriff Calloway's lantern lifted in a single arc. "Hold!" And she wanted to shout at him to put the damned lantern down and look west. The second dust plume thickened, dragging the horizon like a bad omen. Elizabeth finally turned her head enough to catch a slice of the man's face in the corner of her eye. Clean shave. Pale scar under the jaw he kept hidden when he laughed. His hat was different out here. Plain, sweat-stained, but the voice didn't change with hats. He stepped closer, and the badge on his vest caught a nickel's worth of light through the leaves. Deputy Ryland, Sheriff Calloway's right hand. "Set it down, Mrs. Avery," he whispered, the gun steady, the creek whispering below them, and the second column of riders drawing a straight line toward Dry Creek. "Quer que eu já escreva o capítulo 2 agora?" partindo exatamente do momento em que Deputy Ryland ameaça Elizabeth enquanto a segunda coluna de cavaleiros avança para Dry Creek. Ryland's breath was steady against the back of Elizabeth's neck, a patient rhythm that didn't match the hurry building on the horizon. He had the stillness of a man who'd practiced this. Stand close, speak low, leave no marks the town could see from a porch. "Set it down," he said again. She let the Winchester tilt, just enough for the barrel to gleam through willow leaves. Not surrender, angle. The creek whispered over stones at her boots. Up on the ridge, Calloway's lantern made another single arc. Hold. He hadn't seen the second plume. Elizabeth's jaw clenched. Men like Ryland counted on blind spots, a sheriff's pride, a town's habit, a widow's grief. "You favor your right foot," she repeated softly. "Long rides bother an old injury." "Old injury," Ryland agreed, amused. "New money helps." There it was, not a philosophy, only arithmetic. She let her free hand drift to the locket at her throat, a round of cheap brass with Eli's hair inside, and cracked it with her thumb. The tiny mirror winked a shard of white daylight. She'd used it to check stitches by lamplight. She'd never used it to talk to a ridge before. But Ruth Hanley was on that ridge, and Ruth wasn't the sort to watch light without reading it. Elizabeth touched the locket's mirror to the sun, turned her wrist slow, then again. 2 brief flashes, the way Ruth taught schoolchildren to count. Back. For a breath. Nothing. Then from the hollow where Ruth crouched, a faint glint answered, back received. "Hands," Ryland murmured, the muzzle now a cold coin in the small of her back. "No tricks." "Trick would be pretending you're the only one who can count," she said, and let the Winchester slide into the brush, as if she meant to comply. Her right hand drifted to her belt, 2 fingers finding the rawhide knot on a length of twine. She'd tied the twine to a cowbell's clapper that morning, stuffed the bell with rags so it wouldn't ring. Now she slipped the knot loose. The bell mouth gaped like a little brass fish. She set it gently on a rock and nudged it with her heel, so the stopper dropped. Wind took the clapper and kissed it once. A dry, hollow note that traveled like a dropped pin in a quiet church. Down in the drawer, Whitmore's boys heard it and did what they'd trained for, ghosted the cattle faster, swung them wide, made the decoy look more tempting than any plan a limping sheriff could draw. Ryland's gun didn't move. "You're buying time," he said. "Buying," she said. "Stealing was your word." He chuckled, and she felt the chuckle through the steel. "You always were neat with words, Mrs. Avery. Neat doesn't win. Position does." His free hand dipped into her coat and plucked the small lantern she'd tucked inside, the signal glass still warm from her pocket. "Let's not have you talking to the hills." He tossed it into the creek. It went under with a complaint and was gone. Above, the 5 riders at the cottonwoods turned their horses toward the ford. Their leader, the slouched one with the dragging right foot, touched 2 fingers to his brim and gave the trees a lazy scan. He was hunting for silhouettes. The ones he would find, if Calloway didn't move, were the sheriff's and some ranch hands, picked out clean against sky. The second dust plume thickened and began to resolve into shapes. 2 riders and a small sorrel packhorse tugging a low cart. Not a Gatling gun. Elizabeth didn't let her mind spook that far, but a boxy weight all the same. Kegs, maybe? Kerosene. A town doesn't fall from bullets alone. It falls when its granary lights like a match head and its well gets a dead mule in it by dawn. Elizabeth kept her voice even. "You going to kill me here, Ryland? You'll have to explain the body. You'll have to live long enough to spend whatever Ezra Pike slipped you." The name pricked him like a thorn. The muzzle shifted, a hair. "You talk too much, Mrs. Avery. And you shaved too clean," she said. "Scar under your jaw shows like a road in snow." He wasn't used to being seen. She felt it in the way his weight changed. Forward, just a fraction, which was all she needed. Her left hand shot back, fast, as if to brace herself, and clamped around the barrel, pushing it off line. His finger twitched, the shot cracked into alder bark, blasting leaves into the air like the start of a storm. Before the echo died, she dropped her weight and rolled, not away from him, but into him, so his elbow had to bend or break. The pistol spat a second time, wild, and his knuckles smacked rock. She came up with creek mud on her coat and a cut along her wrist where the sight had kissed skin. Ryland swore and grabbed for a fistful of her dress. She let the dress tear. For the second time in a year, something meant to mark her as a woman came apart in someone else's hands, and this time she was grateful. "Ruth!" Elizabeth shouted, throat raw. She didn't waste words. She lifted 2 fingers and jabbed west, hard. Ruth Hanley, a speck in her hollow of stone, didn't ask. Her rifle cracked once, clean as a chalk line. Not at a man. At the sorrel's hind hoof, at the ground a foot to its left. The little pack horse spooked, leaped, and the low cart lurched. Whatever rode in it, kegs, lamps, the town's future, bucked and banged and nearly flipped. One of the rear riders wheeled to grab the lead rope. The other looked up with predator's surprise, searching for the shot. He found Ruth's muzzle flash and sent a bullet back that whined over Elizabeth's head and set a spindle of maple leaves spinning. The 5 at the ford reined short, reading the change like wolves' red wind. The slouched leader raised his palm. Wait. He had sense. Elizabeth granted him that. Wait until the sheriff shows his edges. Wait until the schoolteacher peeks twice. Then bite. Ryland surged at Elizabeth, face emptied of neighborliness. "Enough," he said, and that was when she gave him Eli's lesson, terrain beats temper. She backed 2 steps into the creek where the bottom dipped sudden and slick. Ryland followed without looking. His right foot, the one he favored, slid. Pain lit his face like heat lightning. He grabbed for her shoulder. She ducked and shoved, and his bad leg buckled. Water took him to the hip, then the chest. The gun went under. She put her knee in his wrist until his fingers opened, and the pistol slipped downstream, tumbling, winking once before vanishing into brown water. He came up choking, grabbed her braid, yanked. Stars burst behind her eyes. She let the pain sharpen her and drove her palm into his nose, heel hard. Cartilage cracked. Blood ran hot over his lip. He hissed and released her hair, groping underwater for anything with weight. "Ryland!" Sheriff Calloway's voice carried from the ridge, edged with anger and confusion. "What in hell?" At last, the sheriff was looking the right way. His lantern didn't swing. His rifle did. He took in the second plume, the cart, the split. Calculations ticked. He was too good a lawman not to see it, and too hurt a man to move fast. Ruth's voice cut the air, thin but fierce. "Town!" Elizabeth saw it a heartbeat later. Not smoke, not yet, but a thin thread of dust lifting from Dry Creek itself. Not riders arriving, riders leaving. 2 boys on ponies racing like their boots were on fire. Messengers or decoys flushed by whispers. Either way, the town knew something and didn't know enough. Ryland lunged and got a hand on her belt. She slammed her elbow back. He sagged and laughed, wet and ugly. "You think you can win against a tide, Mrs. Avery. Tides don't argue. They come." "Tides," she said, breath short, "break on rocks." She tore free and waded to the bank, snatched the Winchester from the brush. The action was wet. She worked it, spat water from the chamber, worked it again until it felt like a tool and not a dead weight. She raised, aimed not at a man, but at a rope, the one dragging the little cart. Her shot took the rope clean. The cart slewed, hit a stone, and tipped. Kegs rolled like kicked beehives. One broke, bleeding a sharp, oily smell that bit the back of her nose. Kerosene. A second barrel clonked open to show locomotive wicks and folded rags. Lantern oil ready to make a map of fire across a town's floorboards. The rear rider swore and jumped down to right the cart. The slouched leader at the ford gave up on caution. He chopped his hand once. Now. 2 of his men spurred straight at the decoy cattle, trying to scatter them. The other 3 slid down the bank, using the creek's twist for cover, rifles low. From the ridge, Calloway's rifle finally barked, and one of the creek men jerked and folded. The other 2 flattened and returned fire. Chips jumped from rock near the sheriff's boot. Ruth shifted positions like a chess piece moved by a careful hand and sent another round to ring off a thief's stirrup iron. Whitmore's boys whooped and pushed the cattle hard, bells clanking, making noise now on purpose. Dry Creek's quiet was over. Ryland crawled up the bank on his elbows, face a mess of blood and creek grit, eyes bright with a mean light. "You just signed your town's death warrant," he panted. "They hit the store, the mill, the well. They leave you with ash and thirst. That was the price." "What did Ezra pay you to pretend courage?" Elizabeth asked, picking him up with the barrel and rolling him toward a willow trunk. "How much is a woman's respect worth in Dry Creek coin?" He spat red and grinned. "Ask him yourself." A church bell tolled, one hard note, then another, then a frantic peal that made the hairs lift on Elizabeth's arms. Not the calm call to worship, the town's alarm. It carried clean over the flats, bounced off the cottonwoods, found every ear that had ever waited for a husband to come home. Elizabeth swung to the east. Dry Creek's 2 streets flickered through heat. A smear like early smoke smudged the roofline above the mill, then leaped as if laughing. The thin thread of dust at town thickened into chaotic scribbles. Women were moving, shadows with buckets. A man ran with a rifle and tripped. Far down the road, a rider in a fancy vest, Ezra Pike, or the idea of him, flashed in and out between buildings like a playing card. "Elizabeth," Ruth called from the ridge. "Go." She didn't need the permission. She snatched Ryland's fallen hat and jammed it on her head, ditched her torn coat, slung the Winchester and put 2 fingers to her lips. Her mare came to her like a thought. Elizabeth swung up and drove heels. Water splashed cold across her boots. Then the flats opened in front of her like a book, pages of grass and dust and risk. Behind her, Ryland dragged himself to one knee and managed to find a second pistol from some hidden holster wisdom. He raised it, both hands, arms trembling, and lined the sights with the small of her back. She felt it more than saw it, an animal sense that has kept widows and wolves alive since the first fence post went in the ground. She leaned, and the shot cracked. Something tore at her sleeve. Her mare surged, unhurt. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The bell in Dry Creek screamed, and the mill roof coughed bright flame. Elizabeth lowered her head against the wind and rode for town, straight toward a row of men stepping from the alley beside the general store, rifles leveled, and at their center, Ezra Pike turned and smiled as if greeting a guest to a card table. Elizabeth's mare skidded to a halt at the edge of Dry Creek's main street, hooves grinding the packed dirt into sharp grooves. Heat rolled from the mill, the new blaze eating at its timber frame with greedy orange teeth. The sharp tang of burning kerosene stung her eyes. Above the roar of the fire came the clash of boots on boards, the echo of shouted orders, and threading through it all, the cool, mocking laugh of Ezra Pike. He stood in the shade of the general store's awning, flanked by 4 men with rifles at the ready. His vest was once again the fine brocade he wore on poker nights, though soot had smudged one lapel. His smile was for her alone, as if the burning town were nothing more than a stage, and he the star performer. "Mrs. Avery," he called, voice smooth as varnish, "you've brought quite the storm with you." Elizabeth swung down from her saddle without taking her eyes off him. "Funny," she said. "I thought you'd brought it yourself." A glint of amusement touched his eyes. "I prefer to think I've simply redirected the wind." Behind her, a bucket brigade fought the mill fire, women and boys forming a line from the well, passing tin pails hand to hand. The flames spat back at them, forcing 2 to stumble away, coughing. Every able-bodied man not holding a bucket seemed to be holding a gun, and too many of those guns were aimed at neighbors. "Tell your men to drop them," Elizabeth said, stepping forward until she could smell the expensive tobacco on Pike's coat. "Or I'll see you run out of town with nothing but the cards in your sleeve." Pike's smile sharpened. "Cards," he said, "are worthless unless the table is mine." A crash from the mill made them both glance aside. A section of the roof had collapsed, sending sparks spiraling into the sky. The wind shifted, throwing embers toward the church roof. Elizabeth's stomach knotted. Dry Creek didn't have enough water to fight two fires. Sheriff Calloway appeared at the far end of the street, rifle in one hand, the other pressed against his side. He limped toward them, jaw set against the pane. The crowd's eyes flicked between him and Pike, tension tightening the air like a drumhead. "Ezra," Calloway said when he was close enough to be heard, "you're going to call this off." "Sheriff," Pike replied lightly, "you've been limping for months. Why not sit this one out? Let me restructure the town." Elizabeth stepped sideways, putting herself between Calloway and the gunman. "You restructure with fire and fear. That's not building, it's looting." Pike's men shifted, uneasy under her steady gaze. She caught the faintest flicker of doubt in the youngest one, a red-haired kid she recognized from the freight yard. "Who's paying you, Thomas?" she asked him. "When the town's ash and you're hungry, will Pike feed you? Or will you be the next fence he cuts through?" The boy's jaw worked. Pike's eyes narrowed. "Enough," Pike said, and in that single word, the temperature seemed to drop. "Take her." Two rifles swung toward Elizabeth. She didn't wait for them to close. She lunged for the water trough, seized its rim, and heaved. Cold, filthy water splashed across the nearest gunman's face, making him curse and blink. She used the moment to grab his wrist, twist hard, and send his rifle skidding across the dirt. "Ruth!" she shouted. From the roof of the post office came a sharp crack. Ruth's rifle. One of Pike's men spun sideways, his hat flying into the street. The others scrambled for cover, firing back, but their aim was wild. Ruth was already gone, melting into the shadows. The bucket brigade faltered under the sudden gunfire. Embers landed on the church roof. A thin thread of smoke rose from its shingles. Elizabeth's chest tightened. Two fires now, both feeding on the town's heart. Pike raised his voice above the chaos. "Sheriff, call off your people, or Dry Creek burns." Calloway's gaze slid to Elizabeth. It wasn't a plea, it was trust. The same trust she'd been denied for months. She took a step toward Pike, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You think fire scares me, Ezra? I buried my husband in spring mud and worked a farm through drought. Fire's just one more thing that doesn't get to win." His eyes flickered, and for the first time she thought she saw calculation give way to anger. "Then I'll make sure it wins big." He lifted his hand, the signal to set the second blaze. This one meant for the general store with all the town's food inside. Before he could drop it, a rider came tearing in from the North Flats, dust boiling behind his horse. He reined so hard the animal slid, throwing dirt over Pike's polished boots. "They're coming!" the rider gasped. "Not 5, 15, armed to the teeth, and they've got dynamite." For the first time, Pike's composure cracked. His head snapped toward the open road, where a dark line was growing against the glare of the sun. Elizabeth's hand tightened on her Winchester. This wasn't just Pike's game anymore. Another enemy was riding in, one neither side had planned for, and they were minutes from the heart of Dry Creek. The black line on the horizon swelled into shapes, horses, dust, and the glint of metal. 15, maybe more, riding hard and fanned wide like a net closing on prey. Even at that distance, Elizabeth could tell these weren't Pike's men. Their pace was too disciplined, their formation too tight. Whoever they were, they rode like they'd done this before, town after town. Dry Creek's main street went still, the kind of stillness that comes before a thunderstorm or a hanging. Pike's men shifted nervously, eyes darting between their leader and the advancing riders. Pike himself stepped into the street, squinting into the sun, one hand shading his brow. "They're early," he muttered. Elizabeth caught the slip. Early meant expected. "You invited wolves into a sheep pen?" she said, voice low. "That's your grand plan?" Pike's jaw flexed. "They're a means to an end. You wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand," she said. "You set the fire, then sell the bucket." Sheriff Calloway had moved up beside her, his limp worse now, but his rifle steady. "If those riders hit Pike, they won't care whose payroll you're on." A gust of wind pushed smoke from the mill down the street, mixing with the smell of sweat and horses. The bucket brigade had broken apart, half of them now guarding their families, the other half frozen in place. The church roof was smoking openly. The lead rider from the incoming group lifted an arm, and the rest slowed, forming a loose semicircle at the edge of town. The leader was a broad man in a black duster, his face hidden under a low-brim hat. Behind him, 2 riders led pack mules with canvas-wrapped loads strapped tight. The lumps under the canvas were unmistakable. Dynamite crates. Elizabeth's stomach knotted. "Calloway," she said without looking at him. "If those mules get within 30 yards, the whole street's kindling." "I see 'em," the sheriff replied. Pike stepped forward, signaling to one of his men. "Hold position. No one fires unless I say." "You think you can talk them down?" Elizabeth asked. "They're here for a payout, not a battle," Pike said. "But if anyone spooks them, they'll light the whole place." Elizabeth's gaze swept the rooftops, the alleys, the windows with curtains just barely parted. Ruth was nowhere visible, but Elizabeth knew she was out there, watching, waiting. If anyone could take the mules out clean, it was her. But a single bad shot could set off enough fire to turn Dry Creek into smoke and bones. The Black Duster leader nudged his horse forward until he was close enough to speak without shouting. His voice was deep, almost lazy. "We'll take what we came for, and we'll be gone. You've got 5 minutes to decide how generous you're feeling." Pike forced a smile. "You'll get what was agreed." The man tilted his head. "Agreed's changed. You've got trouble in your nest. That costs extra." Elizabeth stepped past Pike before she could stop herself. "You blow this town. There's nothing here worth carrying away. You leave now. You keep your lives." The leader's eyes slid over her, lingering just long enough to make his meaning clear. "Who's this?" "No one you need to," Pike began. "She's the one who'll bury you if you try it," Calloway cut in. His voice was steady, but Elizabeth saw the sweat beading along his temple. The man in the duster chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You've got spirit, lady. Shame you're on the wrong side of the match." From somewhere high and to the left, there was the faintest metallic click, the sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Elizabeth's heart jumped. Ruth had found her angle. The mules shifted nervously, stamping at the dirt. The riders holding their leads tightened the ropes. A gust of wind carried a fresh wave of sparks from the mill toward the store, one ember landing against the canvas, wrapping a dynamite crate. Elizabeth's eyes locked on it, a single ember smoldering where it had no business being. One more breath of wind, and the entire street would be lit from the center out. She didn't think. She moved. Her Winchester came up in a single motion, the sights finding the ember in the blink of an eye. She squeezed the trigger, the shot snapping through the roar of the fire and the whisper of fear. The bullet tore through canvas, punching the ember out before it could bloom into flame. For a half-second, silence held. Then everything broke at once, horses rearing, riders shouting, Pike swearing, the leader in the duster drawing his revolver. Elizabeth had just enough time to chamber another round before she realized something far worse. The gun in the leader's hand wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at Ruth's rooftop perch. The leader's revolver bucked, the muzzle flash a yellow flare against the smoke-darkened sky. Elizabeth's stomach lurched. She couldn't see Ruth, only the plume of splintered wood exploding from the post office roof where the bullet struck. "Ruth!" Elizabeth shouted, swinging her Winchester toward the Black Duster rider. But the man was already moving, spurring his horse sideways, using one of the dynamite mules as cover. Clever. Anyone taking a shot risked setting off the whole town in one thunderclap. From the rooftop, a second crack rang out, Ruth's reply. The leader ducked in the saddle, the round clipping the edge of his hat and spinning it into the dirt. His head snapped toward her perch, and for a moment his face was clear. Deep-set eyes, skin weathered like rawhide, a scar twisting his mouth into a permanent sneer. He raised his revolver again. Elizabeth fired before he could. Her shot hit the revolver, knocking it from his hand and sending it skittering into the street. The sound jolted Pike's men into motion. Two broke ranks, firing toward the newcomers, while others scrambled for cover behind water troughs and porch rails. Sheriff Calloway bellowed, "Drive 'em out!" and loosed a round that sent one of the mule handlers tumbling from his saddle. The freed mule bolted, dragging its crate of dynamite in a wild arc down the street, scattering townsfolk and outlaws alike. The leader in the duster roared for his men to hold, but their line was breaking. Ruth fired again, forcing another rider to duck behind a wagon. Pike cursed and shoved one of his own men toward the store. "Get the money, now!" Elizabeth saw it then, Pike's plan unraveling. The riders in the sun weren't allies anymore. They were vultures, turning on the man who'd invited them. They didn't care about promises or payouts, only spoils. A shot cracked from the far side of town, striking one of the crates lashed to a mule. Wood splintered, and a stick of dynamite rolled into the dirt, spinning lazily until it stopped inches from a stray ember. Elizabeth's blood iced. She dropped the Winchester to her hip and sprinted. Every step seemed too slow, every heartbeat pounding in her ears. She reached the stick, booted the ember aside, and snatched the dynamite up by its paper tail. Shouts rose from every side. Pike screamed her name, whether warning or threat she couldn't tell. Calloway's voice cut through the chaos. "Elizabeth, down!" She turned in time to see the leader in the duster vault from his horse, a bowie knife gleaming in his fist, his boots pounding straight toward her. The stick of dynamite was still in her hand. Elizabeth's grip tightened around the dynamite, paper crinkling under her fingers. The leader in the black duster charged, boots striking the dirt in time with her heartbeat. She waited, 2 steps, 1, and at the last moment she swung the stick hard, cracking it against his knife hand. The blade spun away, clattering into the dust. He lunged again, but she shoved the dynamite under his chin, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "One wrong move, and we both go with it." For the first time, his eyes wavered. Behind them, Pike's men were scattering, the bucket brigade returning to their lines, the townsfolk seizing whatever courage they had left. Ruth appeared at Elizabeth's side, rifle aimed steady. Sheriff Calloway limped forward, jaw tight but eyes bright with something like pride. The leader took a step back, then another, and finally turned, whistling for his men. One by one, they pulled away, the mule's dynamite still intact. Dust swallowed them as quickly as they'd come. Pike lingered a heartbeat too long. Elizabeth met his gaze. "Your table's gone," she said. "So are your cards." He didn't answer, just spat in the dirt and followed the riders out of town. By sunset, the mill's fire was beaten down to smoking timbers. The church roof was blackened but standing. People moved slow, carrying buckets back to the well, patching what could be patched. Elizabeth stood in the street, smoke curling in the cooling air. Around her the town was battered, but it was still here. And they had stood together, not because of orders from a sheriff or threats from a gambler, but because someone refused to blink first. From that day on, no one in Dry Creek called her poor Mrs. Avery again. They called her by one word only, ma'am, and it carried the weight of respect she had fought to earn. And every time the wind shifted from the north, carrying the smell of rain and gun oil, the town remembered the day a widow stood in the street, face down fire and knives, and led them through the smoke.